Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, Kavanaugh should be embarrassed by Trump's praise for his tariffs dissent, quote from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. If Trump's forever praising you for something, it's probably because you're extremely up his ass, and that's not something that I personally care for. If you want to be up Trump's ass, I think that's fine. Be up whoever ass you want to, but ultimately, Trump's just another par for the course uniparty figurehead rather than someone who actually wants to put America first. He says on the campaign trail, I'll say stuff like "Make America first, put America first, and make America great again." But in office, it's "Make Israel great again" and Israel first. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have top Trump counterterrorism official Joe Kent resigns over Iran, saying it posed no imminent threat to our nation, from CBSNews.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And I'd agree with that. If you're principled right now, you should, and you have a position in Trump's administration, you should resign, because I guess you could make an argument for, trying to influence the administration from within. But, I think the principled libertarian position is you got to resign, because you can't you can't be in this administration and say you're a libertarian, because this administration is very anti-libertarian, just like all the presidents, just like all the other recent presidential administrations as well, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, free stuff tends to have strings attached, and posted by socialists or morons. And then that's a comic of a fish eating a worm off of a hook. And the guy in the communist shirt said fishes are so dumb. And then a communist hammer and sickle hook comes down by him and he says, "OMG, free lunch." And I'd agree with that. Communism might sound good in theory, but in practice, it just leads to authoritarian tyrants like Stalin and Mao. I think if people want to do communism voluntarily among the groups like in communism, I think that's fine, as long as they're not forcing anyone else to join. But when it takes over a centralized state, communism ends up being very authoritarian, and that just goes to show you that Reddit says, "Oh, communism is going to really work this time." Well, in reality, communism is always going to fail every time you try it, because central planning is inherently overly authoritarian and doesn't work. I think it's interesting. Fascism has that really hasn't been tried nearly as much times as communism has, but Reddit thinks fascism is the worst thing ever. Well, if communism has killed arguably more people and has been tried quite a few more times, and Reddit always makes excuses for it, just goes to show you, people will follow whatever the narrative is. I don't think you should make excuses for fascism either. But, communism, you definitely should be making excuses for that either, and that's my thoughts there. Next we have, are you a real libertarian if you just keep letting the government get away with violating people's rights and all the other nasty stuff they do? Posted by China Military Secrets, and they added, are you allowed to have public meetings with people to turn off your phone so that the government can't secretly listen to your private meetings? Canadian government is the worst. When I was young, my family's very poor. My mother needed money badly, so she let a rich Canadian politician take me for a weekend. And yeah, personally, I don't think that sounds very good. But personally, I think the libertarian position is, the government can ultimately get away with violating people's rights as much as they feel like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you could put up a resistance, but that's just only going to put you in more hot water. You probably go to jail. But, the government, if they ever went after you, they'll never go to jail, since they have the legal monopoly of force that the state has on their side. But if you ever did that, it's pirates and emperors. When the state does something, it's the law, but when an individual does it, it's the crime. So ultimately, I don't personally care for the current authoritarian government. Sometimes you just have to cope with it. If you want to justify having a resistance, be it peaceful or non-peaceful, just fight whatever you want to. But, even then, it's pretty much nothing you can really do against it. Next we have, Trump calls Newsom president, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's crosspost from the Destiny subreddit, and that's a clip of Donald Trump saying that on Fox News, I guess. And yeah, personally, I don't think he should be calling gruesome Newsom's presidents. I'm surprised he went with another nickname for that. He didn't go with gruesome Newsom's for the nickname. I think he should have. I think he went with Gavin Newsom. That was his nickname for Gavin Newsom. But yeah, personally, I don't know if Trump's in the best mental state right now. He's nearing 80 and he's not all on. He might have an occasional flub here and there. But of course, Reddit made all the excuses in the world for Joe Biden for being even arguably more senile than Donald Trump is when he was in power. And just to show you, I'm sure if this was Joe Biden saying, oh, President Newsom or President Harris or whatever, Reddit would sweep it under the rug. But, when Donald Trump says that, they're going to go after him in full for it. And just goes to show you they have no values, only teams. They made excuses for Joe Biden's senility for years until they really couldn't anymore after that summer 2024 debate with Trump. And now that Trump looks like he's flubbing, they'll go after him with the fullest extent of their wrath. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Peter Navarro promised $700 billion in tariff revenue. The actual amount was about $240 billion from Reason.com, posted by Johnny Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. government should be taking anything in tariff revenue because tariffs are simply taxes that just like they're taxing imported goods. But ultimately, the government can take as much in tariff revenue as it wants to, and there's nothing to do about it since they have the ability to enforce whatever laws they feel like. Next, we have subscribe to Liquid Zulu, posted by No Restaurant 9320, and that's cross-post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. By far the best anarcho-capitalist YouTubers. There's way more than 15k subs. And yeah, I think if people do want to subscribe to him, I think they should be able to. He did have an interesting video on Dave Smith, being really critical of Dave Smith recently, but ultimately, I would say the libertarian position, if you want to subscribe to whoever you want to subscribe to, you should be able to. And if you don't want to subscribe to someone, you shouldn't be forced to subscribe to them if you don't feel like it. Next, we have Correct, posted by Gen Z Gingy, and that's a meme of every president since Jimmy Carter. It says, for the last 47 years, these men pose a greater threat to your liberty than Iran. And I'd agree with that. Iran's on the other end of the world. They're quite a tyrannical government themselves. But, at least they're very open about it. The U.S. government tries to masquerade as being libertarian, when in reality it's arguably just as authoritarian as Iran. I think that's important to remember as well. And it doesn't really, and as this meme goes into, it doesn't really matter which uniparty figureheads in the White House. Ultimately the U.S. government's going to keep on justifying all the authoritarian deep states nonsense of the CIA, FBI, NSA, and all the other alphabet agencies, regardless of which figurehead is in power. Next, we have Philosophy IQ test results, posted by Zevlar. And yeah, if he wants to take up any kind of political test, I think he should be able to. If he wants to share the results, I think they should be able to as well. Looks like this one got him as the futurist. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, take whatever political test you want to. But, you should definitely keep more think for yourself rather than have do whatever a political test tells you that you are. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Yes, the First Amendment protects free speech for non-citizens, quote from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, I would agree with that. I think everyone should have freedom of speech regardless of their citizenship status. And I think that's very much the libertarian position. Next, we have Trump says he's not afraid of Vietnam-style ground combat in Iran from dailymail.co.uk, posted by Donald Key. And that's a cross-post from the No Filter News subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think Trump should learn the lessons of the Iraq War. But back on the campaign trail, he's constantly dragging George W. Bush for the Iraq War and the Forever War, boots on the ground. That ended up with. But now that he's in power, it seems like he's forgotten that and is just pretty much doing his own thing with another four-letter Middle Eastern country that begins with IRA. And it just goes to show you, politicians will say one thing on the campaign trail, but then they'll take office and stab you in the back. And that's why you can't trust pretty much anything a politician says. Honest politician is very much an oxymoron, except for fewer exceptions like Thomas Massie, I would say. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Mark Levin had to run Daddy Trump after Megyn Kelly, posted by Ambitious Startups, and that's a cross-post from the Tucker Carlson subreddit. 13-minute documentary. Mark Levin had to run to Daddy Trump after Megyn Kelly was giving a verbal shellacking. What a weak little weakling Levin is. Mark Levin is MAGA. What? Are you kidding me? I'm not on the same team as Levin and Shapiro. And I'd agree with that. Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro, they're up Israel's ass. They're just like a lot of them are. At the very least, they're up Israel's ass for a somewhat decent reason, since they're both pretty big on their Jewishness. But, ultimately, just because, you support Israel, I think, if you want to support Israel, that's fine, but don't pretend you're MAGA or America first. If you support U.S. intervention in the Middle East on Israel's behalf, that's by no means MAGA or America first. That's MEGA or Israel first, I would say, more so. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have how did Israel and Israel firsters like Kushner and Miriam Adelson usurp so much power over U.S. foreign policy? Posted by Acadian Academic, and they added, "How did it even get this bad? Holy shit!" And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian answer is, a lot of people will say Epstein, and I do think, there might be some blackmail in the Epstein files because Epstein might have been a Mossad Israeli CIA operative, pretty much. But, ultimately, I think it's kind of always been like this because, the U.S. wanted to help Israel some politicians want to help them for biblical reasons because they think if Israel will bring about the end times, while others, they want to help Israel because they don't want to be accused of being anti-Semites, especially, Israel was founded right after the Holocaust happened. I think that's important to remember as well. And, ultimately, if you want to support Israel, I think that's fine. But I think right now, if the government will fully up Israel's ass, I think the libertarian position is, like what Trump said on the campaign trail, you got to put America first and rather than Israel first. And I think that's very important to remember as well. Next, we have the federal spending spree will make the next economic shock even worse from Reason.com, posted by Johnny Porcupine. And yeah, I would agree with that. Not too much to say on that one. The federal government's always going to spend like there's no tomorrow, regardless of which branch of the Uniparty's in power, despite the Republicans marking themselves as the fiscal responsibility party. Next, we have The Enemy is Power, wherever you find it, posted by Lemon Limelight, and they said, Matt Walensky wants to build a bridge between progressives and classical liberals/libertarians. He comes from the bleeding heart side of libertarianism. Don't worry, he defends markets and private property, plus he's a worthy counterpart to Rothbardians. He made a post about liberalism.org, where he wants progressives to understand that competitive markets can be a form of decentralizing countervailing power. And then he shares a few paragraphs from that article, I guess. And yeah, my thoughts on that are, ultimately I would say a lot of progressives are inherently anti-libertarian, just like a lot of conservatives are. They want to enforce their cultural values on everyone, and I don't think that's very libertarian. I could see an argument for, like, the conservatives of 2012 and the progressives of 2012 being more libertarian, at least on an economic and social level, respectively. But, since then, the Republican conservatives have gone the way of protectionist economics with the situation of tariffs, while the liberals have gone into all hyper-political correctness, aka woke in the parlance of our times, where any dissent against any woke narratives, especially in regards to LGBTQ, whatever other letters they've added as well, is enough to get you kicked out of their party, and if they had their way, you'd probably be thrown in jail as well. So ultimately, build a bridge wherever you want to, find common ground wherever you want to, but ultimately, a lot of people, they don't want to find common ground, they just want to make any dissent at all illegal, and that includes both those on the progressive and conservative side of the aisle, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump has new plan to rebalance media to force them to air more patriotic programming, according to FCC chair from independent.co.uk, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's cross-post from the entertainment subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think this isn't the right answer. The legacy media is increasingly irrelevant. I think the libertarian position is just let them die in their irrelevance rather than try and make them air what you want them to air. In reality, I think Trump thinks they're still extremely relevant. Stuff like ABC, CBS, NBC. Well, in reality, more people get their news from social media these days than the traditional television or newspaper outlets, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Mike Johnson on resignation of Joe Kent, Director of National Counterterrorism. I don't know where Joe Kent is getting his information, but he wasn't in those briefings. Had the president waited, I am convinced he would have mass casualties of American service members and installations damaged. Was by Ninja Lover, and that's crosspost from the video subreddit. It looks like a video from C-SPAN of Johnson saying that. And yeah, personally, if he wants to say, I think that's fine. But Joe Kent is one of the only principled, I would say, members of the administration. Well, he's not a member of the administration anymore. They're already going after him for it. He's saying, oh, he's a leaker. He leaked classified documents. But ultimately, you can either stick to your principles like Joe Kent did, or be a sellout like Mike Johnson or Donald Trump. And I think the libertarian position is very much to stick to your principles. Next, we have MAGA overwhelmingly supports war in Iran with nearly 90% backing Trump's attacks from independent.co.uk, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think that should be true. That's necessarily that should be true. You know, if you're for more Make America Great Again, you're not so you should be supporting forever wars in the Middle East. But regardless, you know, personally, I think a lot of that might come from how a lot of people who did identify as MAGA have since dropped the label since Trump started pushing this war in Iran, and I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Mark Wayne Mullen's History of Condoning Murder and Resisting Transparency Makes Him Ill-Suited to Run DHS from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And I would agree with that, you know, but ultimately, you know, they can put whoever they want to run whatever department they run, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Republicans' immigration policy hurting U.S. economy, effective zero job growth from Fortune.com, posted by FastCVreading739, and that's a cross post from the narco-capitalism subreddit. And they added, Republicans' policies are hurting the U.S. economy from 1994 to 2023. Immigrants, both documented and undocumented, contributing more in taxes than they received in local, state, or federal benefits, totaling a fiscal surplus of $14.5 trillion over the 30-year period. Efforts to stifle immigration for the sake of boosting opportunities for workers in the name of growing the U.S. economy has instead backfired completely. And I guess if you want to believe that, I think that's fine. No, I personally do think, you know, that you know, you can cherry pick statistics however you feel like a lot of the time, student agenda. So, you know, ultimately, I do think, you know, there are some immigrants can be good for the U.S., but, you know, some of them, you know, are just gonna come here and live off the welfare state, and I don't think that's very libertarian. I think the libertarian position is, you know, take in as many immigrants as you want, but make it as hard as possible for them to get on the welfare state. And if they do come here illegally, it should be illegal for them to be on the welfare state, I would say. Next, we have U.S. officials not allowed to tell Trump Iran war concerns. Former counterterrorism director claims from CBC News, posted by Legio X. And I'd agree with that. You know, Trump only wants to hear what he wants to hear. He doesn't want to hear any criticism of his position. So that doesn't sound too surprising for me. Next, we have House rejects effort to force a balanced budget in the U.S. from Politico.com, posted by Socialist Are Morons, and they added, fuck these morons. And I'd agree with that. You know, ultimately, you know, a balanced budget's pretty much just a libertarian wet dream at this point. We can only hope we don't default in our massive debt in the near future. Next, we have What is Syndicalism and What is it Good For from libcom.org, posted by Goron Person 777. And yeah, if you want to do syndicalism, I think that's fine, but you justify doing whatever ideology you want to as long as you aren't enforcing it on other people without their consent. And that's my thoughts there. And then I wanted to share another post I made to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit as well. I said, what did your most recent Libertarian Party candidate for governor, senator, whatever other position you want to talk about run on? I linked to a screenshot of Ken Kowalczyk. He's going to be the Libertarian Party's nominee for governor of my state, Pennsylvania, this year. Technically, he's not going to be the party's nominee until Saturday. He's pretty much unopposed. And he shared a picture of his platform: eliminate property tax by prioritizing failing schools, give every child an 11,500 private education voucher without raising taxes, veto all tax increases, and pork barrel spending. Details at KincaidB4PA.com. And I think those all sound good. You know, ultimately, I think libertarian positions, you know, emphasize school choice as much as possible. So I think that's good. But, and you know, I said if I would run, for my try in 23, since the first time I make the age requirement, I run having independence referendum. I really want us to get out before the bloodshed really starts amping up, kind of like Slovenia did in regards to the breakup of Yugoslavia. You know, increasingly have people who justify enforcing their will on others through violence, like Charlie Kirk getting assassinated, and I don't think that's very libertarian. I think I think it's only going to get worse as time goes on and people get more and more deluded by social media. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. I personally think the libertarian position is, you know, ultimately the American empire is inherently unsalvageable at this point, and it probably should be dissolved as much as possible, and the states should go their own separate ways for at least a little while. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.